Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Meet Touchstone Essentials live product training version. We've got Cindy Klement here with us tonight. How you doing, Cindy?
I'm doing well, Craig. Thanks for having me this evening.
Good. We're excited to have you and learn from you tonight. As you know, Cindy is amazing. She's got her master's degree in nutrition. She's an adjunct professor teaching nutrition. She teaches the doctors about nutrition. She's been involved in herbal health and nutrition for over 40 years. She knows her stuff. We're so excited to have her with us. And I just want to point you to the book that she's written, Your Body's Environmental Chemical Burden. And again, just absolutely impressed with your book. And it's fun to just open that up and see all those little badges in there and all the awards that you've won from that book. So congratulations on that. And again, thanks for being with us tonight.
My pleasure.
And tonight we're going to talk about the gut and microbiome, right?
That's exactly what we're talking about, Craig.
We'll take it away.
All right. Good evening, everybody. We're going to continue with our exploration of the body systems and how our environment and our lifestyle affect the health of these organs. And as Craig mentioned, tonight we're going to be talking about the intestinal system. Last time we talked about the digestive system. So we went from the mouth all the way to just at the bottom of the stomach. So we're going to continue through that tube tonight. So as you may recall, from that digestive system webinar, the average American consumes about 35 tons of food in their lifetime. I don't know how they came up with that, but you know, that's a lot of food. And so again, this is a really important body system because it has to process all that food throughout our lifetime. Okay, so let's talk about the intestinal system. Hippocrates understood the role of our intestines, of our gut, when he proclaimed over 2,000 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. Of course, he had other famous proclamations such as nature is the best physician and let food be thy medicine and let thy medicine be thy food. So, of course, we're all into nutrition using these amazing products. So Hippocrates would be proud. Now, the intestinal microbiome, which is that bacteria in our gut, we have over 100 trillion microorganisms in our gut microbiome, and anywhere from about 300 to 6,000 distinct bacterial species. And all of that contributes to about 4 to 6 pounds of our body weight. So I think that's interesting. So if you've ever had the flu and you've been really sick and you've had diarrhea and you notice how much weight you drop, a lot of that is that bacteria. So now in the aging process, let's talk about that a little bit. The gut microbiota actually undergoes substantial changes if you're not taking supplements and taking care of yourself and eating right. But this can affect the functionality of course, our gut, but also our immune system and the way our brain functions. There can also be a reduction in the gut bacteria that can lead to fecal incontinence as we age, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, changes with your sleep, changes with the mood, and also frailty. So again, a really important body system to continue working with here. Now, the job of this intestinal system is to assimilate the nutrients and make them available to the body so the body can build and repair and just maintain tissue. It does a number of things, the intestinal system, including it reabsorbs water and electrolytes and sends them back to the bloodstream. The intestinal system eliminates our cellular waste and toxins that have been released from cells. It eliminates our digestive byproducts and all types of indigestible substances, that indigestible fiber. It also houses bacteria, and some of that bacteria actually produces vitamin B12 or biotin or vitamin K. And this bacteria, of course, then helps protect us against harmful bacteria, viruses, funguses, and things like that. So let's first start with the small intestine, because as you see in the illustration, that's right at the end of the stomach, and that's where we left off last time. And this area, this small intestine, is a really crucial component of the digestive system, in that it allows for the breakdown and absorption of these important nutrients that were derived from the food that we've eaten. And then what this does is it permits the body to function at its peak performance. So this small intestine accomplishes this via a whole complex of a network of blood vessels and nerves and lymphatics and muscles, and all of this works together to help achieve that task. Now, during our webinar on the digestive system, we talked about the word chyme, which is what happens to the food once it's in the stomach and mixed up. At this point, it enters the small intestine by way of something called the pyloric sphincter. So it's like a muscle, a little sphincter that opens and closes. And it's the gateway to the small intestines. And this little valve determines when the food has been mixed enough in the stomach in order to pass, and it helps then when it's ready to pass, it can help to enhance the absorption of the nutrients. The three parts of the intestine that you see there, together they absorb the starches, the proteins, and the fats. And this is where that chyme is then broken down further into those smaller nutrients. So the first part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. And this is where the absorption actually begins here. And this is where the pancreatic enzymes now enter to help break down that chyme. And then we've also got neutralizing things. Bicarbonate is secreted to help neutralize all of that stomach acid. And it's in the second part of the small intestine called the jejunum. And this is in the area where the sugars and the amino acids and the fats are actually absorbed. And the third part is the ileum. And here is where any remaining nutrients that didn't get absorbed, in particular, things like vitamin B12 or bile acids. And what happens is that these will then go on to be recycled in the body. Now, I think this is really fascinating. You need a large surface area. It's extremely important for this absorption to occur so intensely. So if you look at the smaller illustration where it shows the ileum, there are a number of folds and crevices inside of this small intestine. It's approximately 22 feet long. It's only about an inch in diameter. And the small intestine ends at what is called the ileocecal valve. And it's the ileocecal valve then that prevents that backflow of material and keeps the toxins out of the small intestine. So we've got a sphincter at the top and a sphincter at the bottom to kind of keep that stuff in there and not be moving throughout. Now, this ileocecal valve controls the exit of the chyme into the large intestine, or the colon as it's called. It's located in the same area as the appendix. And the research today shows that the appendix, they never really knew what it was for when I was born in the 50s. But they know that this little hollow, kind of like a finger-like a pouch that hangs at the end of the cecum, there's an abundance of evidence that indicates that the role of the appendix is a place where the good bacteria can live safely and undisturbed until it's needed. And that, to me, is a really good example of how the intestines play a role in our immune health. Now, You've probably heard the saying, you are what you eat, but really, folks, you are what you absorb. So, the absorption is that process where the nutrients in the form of glucose are taken up by the small intestine and passed into the bloodstream. The lining of that small intestine, you can see by the illustration, especially on the bottom one, they look like little fingers and they're called villi, which is Latin for shaggy hair. But because of all these folds and villi, the surface area of the small intestines is equal to over 2,100 feet. And yes, you heard me correctly. That's a lot of surface area. So these little villi, I always imagine them as just kind of like a finger-like structure that helps to move that food along, that the chyme along. And I always explain to children that it's like little straws. And as that moves through, the villi are absorbing the nutrients and carrying it into the bloodstream. So these little fingers are designed for that absorption of nutrients to get the nutrition out of the food that we eat. Now, the colon's main function is to really process the approximately 3 pints of liquid stool that it receives every day. And what it's supposed to do is bring that down to a manageable amount of a solid stool that's ready for evacuation. So just think of it as the storage tube for that solid waste. And as I mentioned, it's connected to the small intestine at the top end at that ileocecal valve, which you can't really see, but it's behind that cecum area. And then there's also another sphincter at the bottom near the anus. So again, another sphincter here and sphincter here to kind of keep everything where it's supposed to be so that it's not getting it back into our bloodstream. Now, it too, as you can see by the illustration, has 3 parts. It has the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon. And again, in this large intestine is where the water, the salts, some of the vitamins and electrolytes are extracted and absorbed. And of course, here's where the toxins are concentrated to be released through defecation. Now, the defecated material that we pass, it contains sloughed off cells from our bodies, inorganic matter, water, unabsorbed nutrients, food residues, digestive solutions, bacteria. That's all the stuff that we have to pass out of our body. But until that material gets to that large intestine, remember it's called chyme, but by the time it reaches that colon, almost 90% of all of the nutrients and water have been absorbed by the body. And as it moves through that large intestine, it mixes with mucus and bacteria, and that's where it becomes feces. So the bacteria, which I think is really cool too, the bacteria break down some of the fiber that we eat for, especially the prebiotic fiber. It breaks down the fiber that we eat for their own nourishment. And then that bacteria creates its own waste products from eating that prebiotic fiber. And then in turn, their waste material from these bacteria are used by the cell lining of the colon for nourishment. So a really symbiotic relationship. Now remember, the large intestine does not produce any digestive enzymes. All of the chemical digestion is completed in the small intestine before that chyme reaches that large intestine. Now, Dr. Michael Gershon wrote a book in the early 1990s. It's called The Second Brain, and it's still available today on Amazon. And if you haven't read it, it's just So fascinating. And this book made him a pioneer in the science of the brain gut phenomena. So, up until that point, we really didn't understand the connection between our brain and our gut. And the truth is, our body does plenty of thinking with our guts. And I mean, you've probably all had a gut feeling, haven't you? There are more than 100 billion nerve cells in our gut. There are more serotonin receptor sites in our gut than in our entire spinal cord and brain. And the neurotransmitter serotonin, of course, is the key to a very healthy mood. It's also known that many of these neuropsychiatric disorders begin in the gut, and nerves in our gut connect to the brain via a very large nerve called the vagus nerve. And what happens is this nerve going from our brain to our gut has a two-way directional kind of a feature, and it enables what we call bottom up signaling from the gut to the brain, and that top down signaling, whereby the brain will influence the gastrointestinal tract, where the gastrointestinal tract will then influence the brain. So, this top down, the stress that we feel, this anxiety can affect the gut. It can affect our motility. It can affect nutrient delivery, microbial balance, and the bottom up data suggests that this dysbiosis, when our gut is a mess, when it doesn't have enough of the good bacteria, but it's got lots of the kind we don't want, it can induce depression and anxiety, and it can have a significant influence on psychosis, on mood, on behavior. And the research actually has shown that exposure to stressful events absolutely influences that microflora composition, creating both a short term and a long term effect. Also, dysbiosis, which just means the wrong kind of bacteria in the gut, the wrong kind, the bad kind, as they call it. When you have that dysbiosis in the gut, it has been implicated in diabetes, in metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, as well as in obesity. Now, the gut is also a very prominent part of the immune system. We've mentioned this before. It's called GALT, gut associated lymphoid tissue. And this is the largest mass of lymph tissue in our entire body. And it consists of these lymphoid follicles forming what is called the Peyer's patches. You can kind of see it on the slide. This is considered the immune sensor of the intestines. Approximately 70 to 80% of the body's immune cells are here in the Peyer's patches in the gut. So it's just one more very important reason to keep that gut in really good health. Now, the World Health Organization defines probiotics as living organisms, which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. So the benefits of probiotics include things like inhibiting the invasion of pathogens or reducing that gut permeability, that leaky gut. Also reducing those endotoxin levels. And an endotoxin is just a toxin that is present inside a bacterial cell, and it's released when that cell disintegrates. All cells have a life. So when that bacterial cell dies, this endotoxin then enters our body, and it can be quite a problem. Now, prebiotics, on the other hand, they're the non-digestible fibers that ferment in the GI tract and feed that bacteria, the good bacteria. For instance, an inulin type prebiotic can enhance the growth of bifidobacteria and lactobacillus in the gut. And of course, that can exert a beneficial effect on preventing cardiovascular disease. So the gut is just so important because having the healthy balance a good tight junctions in the gut, having the right kind of bacteria is really beneficial because the research does suggest that prebiotics can reduce our risk of type 2 diabetes, of obesity, and even osteoporosis. Now, probiotic means for life, and an antibiotic, of course, means against life. Now, we've got billions of bacteria that live in our GI tract, and the number and the type of bacteria in our GI tract vary dramatically by which region of the intestines that we're talking about. In healthy individuals, the stomach and the very beginning of the small intestine contain very few microorganisms. But in a very sharp contrast, the contents of the colon are literally teeming with bacteria. The GI tract, by the way, when we're born, it's sterile, but the colonization of our gut typically begins within a few hours of birth, especially if you've had a vaginal birth. If you've had a C-section, you have not gotten the inoculation. And that's when they'll have the infant lay on the bare skin of the father and lay on the bare skin of the mother, because we also have bacteria on our skin. And that's the way we can inoculate an infant that hasn't come through the vaginal area. But starting in the small intestine, just a few hours after birth, and again, especially a vaginal birth, it progresses over several days, but in most cases, their microbial flora is established in an infant by 3 to 4 weeks of age. Now, if you want to know the whole story about the gut microbiome, you can just look me up on YouTube. You can just put Cindy Klement YouTube and it'll come up. And I have a presentation there on my YouTube page. It's called The Gut Microbiome, from prenatal development through the aging process. And what's nice about that is you can just share that link with people, and you can just, it will help you to convince them to try some of these products if you're having a little bit of trouble. So if you're looking for probiotics, really look no further. The Super Greens Plus D contains 5 billion CFUs, colony forming units of probiotics and prebiotics. We've got Bacillus coagulans, which is a prebiotic fiber. In the Super Greens Plus D, we have Lactobacillus gasseri, and this type of bacteria is naturally found in the genital area, in the urinary area, and digestive systems of the body, whereas the Bifidobacterium bifidum is the most common bacteria that is found in the intestines. We also have Bifidobacteria longum, which is abundant in the GI tract. And we also have inulin, which, just like the Bacillus coagulans, is another prebiotic fiber. And this will help to reduce that gut permeability, that leaky gut, kind of tighten the junctions. The inulin will help to bring down some of that inflammation. And again, reestablish that tight junction that we need and help to reduce those toxins in the gut. Now, the super green juice, on the other hand, when we're talking about repairing a body, we need superfoods, don't we? We need protein and we need superfoods. Yeah, of course, the super green juice has 44 different superfoods. It's got 3 grams of fiber, more fiber that bacteria can live on and digest in our gut. The super green juice has 3 grams of protein and 1 billion more colony forming units of probiotics. And of course, the super green juice is alkalizing. And remember, when you have an acid pH in your body, that triggers inflammation and slows the metabolism, slows your digestion. So we want to make sure that inflammation is gone. We want to kind of speed up that metabolism. The super green juice also has antioxidants that are going to boost digestion. This is what it's all about, boosting that digestion, boosting our brain health, protecting us from heart disease, diabetes, and what I call the abnormal cell proliferation. Also, super green juice is adaptogenic. And what that's going to do is help our body better handle and adapt to that stress that we know can affect the gut bacteria that we have. And lastly, I shouldn't say lastly, there's so much going on with green juice, our super green juice, but the mushrooms, they're going to support the immune system, the GALT in our gut. They're going to give us some energy. The mushrooms are going to give us more antioxidant support, as well as that naturally occurring vitamin D, which is so helpful for the immune system. Switching gears now, let's talk about how toxins affect the GI tract. I mean, as odd as that seems. Now, the association of pesticides with cancer was first noted in the 1960s when farmers who were using insecticides in grape fields had higher prevalence of skin and lung cancer. That was the 60s. Since then, there have been several other health studies that have associated pesticide exposure with cancer of the colon and cancer of the rectum. And folks, due to the overwhelming stress in our lives, our bodies are struggling to eliminate all different kinds of toxins that are accumulating in our cells. And we've got those abnormally large spaces. If we've got that leaky gut or that gut permeability, those abnormally, and they're not this large, but that's just for illustration purposes. They're actually microscopic, but those large spaces in the cells of the gut wall allow the entry of toxic material to get into our bloodstream. Circumstances be repelled or eliminated. So that gut then becomes leaky in the sense that bacteria and fungi and parasites and toxins are now passing through that damaged, leaky gut and causing malabsorption of many of those really important nutrients. So detoxification is necessary. And detoxification dates back to 2500 BC, where Egyptians were using hollowed out gourds filled with water to clean their colons, somewhat like an enema or a colonic. But today, of course, it's a lot easier for us, but absolutely a must that we need to detoxify. We're bombarded with chemicals and heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, colorings, flavorings, and none of this existed prior to industrialization. So our digestive systems weren't designed for this. These toxins are making their way into our bodies at a cellular level. Now, according to a 2019 study published on zeolite, clinoptilolite, and which the researchers, by the way, called ZC, so we'll call it ZC, they published a study in a peer-reviewed journal called Molecules, and it was in 2019, and they said zeolites are porous materials with a high absorbency and ion exchange capacity, and that their structure is such a dense network that it generates these cavities where water and toxins and other kinds of molecules are inserted and exchanged. And in this research paper in 2019, they said that ZC is an excellent detoxifying, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory agent. Furthermore, it's capable of improving that ecosystem of our intestinal microbial flora and helps to purify that environment of our body and help to maintain the proper balance of that gut microbiota and that homeostasis to kind of keep it that way. And so my question is are you using your Pure Body and your Pure Body Extra every day? Because you should be. There's not a day in your life where you're not exposed to some kind of toxicant. And there are still more ways that we can support the intestinal system. So let's look at that. The endocannabinoid system, as you know, is a biological system in the body that helps to regulate and balance key body functions. In 2015, the American Journal of Physiology wrote that dysregulation of the endocannabinoid system may contribute to the development of several intestinal disorders, such as diverticulitis, celiac disease, irritable bowel syndrome, and inflammatory bowel disease. And then a little bit later, the National Institutes of Health in the National Library of Medicine stated that results indicate that CBD indeed unravels a new therapeutic strategy to treat inflammatory bowel disease. I mean, wow. We've got all the products that we need to keep our bodies healthy. And I want you to know that on a side note, there's evidence that prebiotics and probiotics also positively affect our endocannabinoid system, which is where the Super Greens Plus D and the Super Green Juice are even more beneficial when we're using them on a daily basis. So these CBD products can feed and support that ECS, the endocannabinoid system, and they're available at 25 milligrams per serving, 50 milligrams per serving, whatever you're interested in. They're organic. There are no solvents, no artificial ingredients. They're fast acting, they're highly absorbable, and they're non-GMO. You can't get it any cleaner or better than that. So in summary, to achieve optimal health, we need to reset. We need to eliminate the things that are negatively affecting our health. We need to eliminate as best as we can the environmental chemicals. We need to eliminate the visceral fat, that extra body fat that we have. We have to eliminate that accumulated waste material that we have in our body, but we also may need to reset our dietary habits, our sleep, our stress level. So we need to reset. And when we reset, the next step then is to do the repair. Provide that nutritional support for healing and regeneration of the gut and help to reduce that inflammation and tighten those junctions back up. So we've reset, we've repaired, and now we're going to replenish. And what that means is to restore that healthy balance of beneficial bacteria to the gut by re-inoculating with the desirable flora and obtain that balance to help keep our body working at an optimal level. So that, my friends, concludes tonight's presentation. I'm going to ask you to please join us again on November 4th, and we're going to explore the structural system and the touchstone essential products that can help to support a stronger and less painful body system. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and stay well.
Thank you, Cindy. Well done. Thank you. Great information. I love that. And the wonderful products that we have to support the gut and the intestinal system. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us tonight and spending some time with learning about touchstone essential products and gut and intestinal system. And Cindy, once again, thank you. We look forward to seeing everybody on the 4th of November to learn a little bit more about the structural system. Have a great night, everybody.
Good
Take
night.
care. Bye-bye.